Thank you for joining us today. Our session is called Breaking Security for Online Safety, What's at Stake in Asia Pacific. In case you might have walked into the wrong session, you can edge back to the door, but please stay. Please give us a chance. So my name is Noelle, and I'm with the Internet Society. Please get comfortable. So if you might have been tracking the discussions around content moderation in recent years or internet regulation recently, you may notice there's an increased trend towards making intermediaries liable for the content that we users produce, that we share through their platforms, on their platforms rather, through their services. So this discussion really is part of a bigger trend around intermediary liability, but we're not. That is another big debate. So we are not going to go into that in general. We are going to focus on a specific aspect, which are essentially the laws, the new laws that are coming up in the last 2, 3, 4 years that would like that focus rather on or would like to protect users from accessing potentially harmful content, illegal content. And we see this in several economies. In the US, they have what they call the Earn It Act. There's online safety bill in the UK. This is also being deliberated in the EU. And of course, we have variations of this in Asia Pacific. In India, we have the revised intermediary liability guidelines that came into place. And in Australia, of course, we have the Assistance and Access Act. So what these laws, the newly enacted and proposed laws, what they would like to do essentially, and what they have in common is they would require intermediaries to detect potentially harmful content, report that content to law enforcement, to government, and also have the ability to block or censor specific types of content. So, noble goals, very noble goals. But this is becoming impossible. And that has to do with the security that we are all enjoying now online. So we've come to a point where we feel confident enough to reveal details that we wouldn't normally reveal to the person next to us. These are bank details. We are confident enough to transact online, to communicate trade secrets, government secrets online, without having the fear of somebody spying on us or somebody, potentially defrauding us. The fear is, still there. It's still possible, but we've come to a level of security where we can be confident enough not to be stopped by that fear. And it makes the internet more valuable because we can do things more. We can do more things online rather. So, but an essential part of the secure systems, and this is something that we don't, I suppose, say enough, it's just, and we don't appreciate enough, it's just how hard it is to secure the online environment. But we finally, gotten to that a level of comfort, at least for now. It's an evolving threat landscape. But an essential part of having secure systems is, secure tools. And one of them is encryption. So we'll get into what encryption is later for the non-technical audiences in the room. But essentially, with it, and encryption is everywhere. It's, you know, it's, I read one statistic that says like 96% of the systems that we use now use encryption. So it's very widely used. And the gold standard for encrypted systems is what's called end-to-end encryption. So encryption in general, what it does in a very basic sense is it scrambles the messages that you type online. It scrambles it so that the people who are not authorized to read that message cannot read the message. So what they will see is like just a bunch of characters. In end-to-end encryption, what we have is that if I send a message to you, so I am the source of the message and you are the recipient. So I intended for you to read the message. So in an end-to-end encrypted system, the message is garbled so that only I, the source of the message, and you, the recipient of the message, or the intended recipient of the message, can make sense of the message. So everyone else who might be, you know, accessing the message can only read, well, things that don't make sense, including the service providers that we use. So for WhatsApp, for example, a lot of us use WhatsApp. So Meta, the owner of WhatsApp, or the staff of Meta, cannot read the things that I would send to you through WhatsApp. So if Meta cannot read what I send to you, or what anyone sends to anyone else, how can it detect the harmful content that's being said on WhatsApp? So that's what makes the proposed laws rather difficult, because it means that for Meta to be able to read what I'm saying to you, if say I am saying something potentially harmful, it would need to weaken the system. It would need what security experts create a systemic vulnerability. So these laws, as we know, have a very good intention. And one could argue, well, these laws just want to give law enforcement access to what criminals are saying. But a vulnerability as a weakness is a weakness. So once you have a weakness, you can use it for other things. You know, if a government, for example, has an interest in monitoring certain conversations, there is little that's stopping them from using it for mass surveillance, if that is of interest. There is little that's stopping, I don't want to pick on Meta anymore. There is little stopping a platform from using that to profile us, to know our preferences, and to monetize this, say, share it with the advertisers, etc. And of course, criminals, essentially what these laws are saying, well, look, these systems are weak. So you're creating a target for the criminals to identify and a target for them to exploit. And they will do that because, well, many of them are quite determined. So the goals for this session, of course, we will touch upon the laws that are being proposed, especially in Asia Pacific. But we would also like to discuss, are these laws effective? Can these laws do what they meant to do, which is protect us from harm, to keep us safe? And what's at stake? What are the risks that we should expect should these laws come into place? Some of them already are. And lastly, of course, we would also like a way forward. So we would like to explore the alternatives. Are there solutions that we can pursue that will protect us from harmful content, harmful behavior online, without necessarily having to compromise our security? So with that in mind, I think I've spoken too long. I will turn over to my co-moderator, Shruti. Shruti is with the dialogue, and she's joining us from India, and she will introduce our speakers. Take it away, Shruti.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Noelle, for the great context setting and for helping us understand what the expectations are from this session. I hope I'm clear and audible. All right. So just now, very quickly introducing our speakers, and then we'll kickstart the discussion. So we have with us today Professor Debayan Gupta. He is a computer science professor at the Ashoka University here in India. We have with us Professor Vanessa Teague. She is also an adjunct associate professor with the Australian National University and CEO of Thinking Cybersecurity. We have with us Mr. Pablo, who is a strategic engagement director at APNIC, and Mr. Alex Lynch, who is a public policy and government affairs manager with Google Australia. So the idea and the intentions of the session has already been established quite well by Noelle. So now, without wasting any further time, I think we should bring in our speakers to share their thoughts. I'd like to begin with Professor Debayan. Professor, we've seen that in India, 2 years ago, we had the IT rules of 2021 come in, and they introduced the traceability mandate, which now enforces that if the government wants, it can mandate a service provider to disclose the originator of a particular message on an encrypted platform. And many technical experts have come on record to say that there can be many dire implications of such a traceability mandate for encrypted platforms. So 2 years down the line, what are your views in terms of how this law has played out, what the repercussions have been? Has there been any scenarios where the said law has led to any challenges, or what the situation is currently in India with respect to the traceability norm that exists under the IT rules?
Sure. How many hours do I have to answer that?
So take 2 to 3 minutes. That should be.
So the way I see it, look, I won't get too much into the technical side, but I will say, generally speaking, when the laws of mathematics come in contact with the laws of a country, generally speaking, the laws of mathematics tend to win. However, it's important to understand that most of these countries are coming from, these people are not evil, the people who are proposing these laws. It's coming from a really good place, right? So let's try and steelman this argument and see what's the best we can do. In India, even though the law is there on paper, I can say that it hasn't really worked out very well. Like, people are not actually providing originator tracing. And I want to focus a little bit more, rather than the technical things, which we'll discuss, I'm sure, in the next half an hour, 1 hour. I want to focus a little bit more on the operational aspects. Assume that there's some sort of magic way in which you can actually do this, right? Who are the threat actors? That's the term of art that we like to use. Who's going to get caught? And what are the downsides and upsides of such a thing? And what worries me that in a lot of these cases, when I've spoken to Indian government officials, I found a very vague sense of who the threat actors actually are. In some sense, they're trying to catch all the stupid criminals out there. Because see, if you're a clever criminal, what do? You pay $300 and get a phone number from a different country, and then the Indian authorities can't really trace you, right? They also seem to have very little understanding of, and that might be on purpose, of how they're going to handle and store a lot of this data, because some of the proposed solutions at least involve the Indian government itself storing a lot of data. Now, if you think about all of the governments which have stored lots of data that you've heard of, the US, Australia, India, we regularly lose that data on a vast scale, right? Like, seeing as a large part of the audience is in Australia, you all, along with the US, lost large parts of the plans of the F-35 Mark II Lightning not too long ago, right? Supposedly to China. Now, if people can't even keep their military secrets secret, right? People are downloading details of alloys and stuff. Why should we trust, as citizens, the government to keep this information secret, right? Further, think about the operational problem. And I'll just mention this in 2 parts. One, suppose there's an Indian citizen living in Japan sending a message or an email or whatever to an American citizen living in Australia. How many governments need to see this message exactly? right? Like it quickly becomes complex because other than perhaps global warming, the internet is really humanity's only other planetary scale achievement. And now trying to cut that apart is very, very difficult. And the analogy I'd like to put in here are tax laws, right? Our monetary system is also, if not perfectly global, it's quite global. And when we're placing tax laws, new changes in the ways we do commerce, we're very careful. And that's exactly how careful we need to be when we make these kinds of laws restricting or changing the way we see information. That's the level of game you need to bring to the table. Because if you don't, you're going to get yourself into trouble, right? The last point I'd like just to make over here is that a lot of these systems, it may feel like the changes that are being suggested are tiny. It's like, come on, you can't even give us this much. Like, why are you being so nitpicky? The problem is, think of your high school hated geometry textbook, right? What you're telling us is, can't you make like one little tiny change and say, adjacent angle, the angle doesn't need to add up to 60. It's 361 degrees. Just give me 1 degree. The problem is that we've built an entire world on top of these assumptions, right? And even a tiny edit to one of them, it may seem very small, but it means we need to rewrite the entire textbook, right? And even then, it may not be enough. So we need to be really, really careful about the upsides and downsides of what we want. Last point about upsides, I've spoken to many government officials asking them to give me statistics about, okay, suppose you had this, how many criminals would you catch? Do you have a statistic? Do you have, I told you what the downsides might be, and I can give you some idea of what is the pain we might feel. And this is without going into chilling effects and so on, right? What is the upside? Can you tell me every year we can solve 1,500 cases, we'll catch 35 terrorists or whatever. And they don't have those statistics. So I'm actually not completely averse to these laws. I'm willing to hear this stuff out, but I want to see a clear public cost benefit analysis before I talk more.
Thank you so much for that great points that you've made. Just to also add to what Professor Debayan just said and give a little more background about what the law is currently and what the situation is. So the traceability mandate has in fact been challenged before the constitutional courts of India. It started with the Delhi High Court, and now the petition is pending before the Supreme Court of India. And also, we have a discussion around the amendment of the existing Information Technology Act in India. And very soon, we might have a new Digital India Act. So building this discourse and having these discussions becomes even more relevant right now. Now we are thinking of bringing in a new legislation. It's important to gauge what the challenges exist in the current legislation and the delegated legislations therein, and maybe revisit them in this new policy-making process. So while this goes on, I think we should also understand what's happening in the other jurisdictions. And for that, Noelle, I'll turn back to you to request you to please have a couple of questions from Dr. Vanessa and Pablo while I'll be back in a few minutes.
Thank you very much, Shruti, and thank you very much, Dr. Debayan. Really excellent points. Let me turn now to Vanessa. Vanessa is also a doctor, by the way, but I don't want to be too formal to somebody in Australia. So Australia was an early fan or an early proponent of these kinds of laws through its Assistance and Access Act. Could you tell us more about, because this has come into, this has been, has been enacted. Could you tell us more about what the implementation has been like, and whether you have a sense of how effective it might already be to catching criminals, so to speak, or just mitigating online harms? And I do have a follow-up question that's related to that. A lot of these laws now say, no, we don't want to break encryption. That's actually what they like to emphasize. We're not breaking encryption. So there has been, the encryption debate is a decades-long debate, and we see now a shift from the explicit request for backdoors towards more nuanced ways to to get access to our data, such as client-side scanning. Could you comment on what risks we can expect from these? Because another justification that has been made is that it's not, strictly speaking, it's not really breaking encryption. And I will leave you to elaborate on that.
Thank you. Again, it depends how many hours you've got to listen. That was the big question. So I agree very much with basically everything Debayan said. And I typed out for later the quote about what happens when the laws of mathematics and the laws of countries conflict. Look, Australia has been on the bleeding edge of breaking security in the name of safety for many years now. And the answer to your first question is we don't really know either how effective it has been at catching criminals or how much damage it has done to the rest of our security. We have had in recent years, after the passage of the Assistance and Access Act, both some spectacular busts in which very, very serious criminals were successfully caught, and also some spectacular data breaches in which millions of Australians' personal information was exposed online. One of the characteristics of the Assistance and Access Act and various other pieces of legislation along these lines is that they come with no transparency at all. In fact, they come generally with sort of anti-transparency measures that say that companies that are targeted with these kinds of orders are not allowed to reveal how many or how often or what exactly was requested. So we don't know, either on the positive side or on the negative side, how big the implications of this raft of legislation has been. So that's the answer to your first question. We just don't know. The second part of your question, oh no, actually, that's not strictly true. So the one piece of definite, I have definite knowledge of two specific causal connections on each side of this debate. One is that there was a significant case very soon after the passage of the Assistance and Access Act in which the Australian Federal Police claimed that they had used the provisions of that bill. And the part of it that they specifically referred to was the part in which they were allowed to, that essentially upped the penalties for suspected criminals who refused to open their phones. So that bit, if the AFP are to be believed, which I do believe them, that part has been specifically used and has served positively in the conviction of very bad people. So on the one hand, that's good. We don't know anything definite about the other provisions, such as the technical capability notices or the capacity to press gang people with knowledge of computer systems to force them to work on breaking stuff. We just don't know. As far as I'm aware, there's no public information. On the other side, Australia, even before the Assistance and Access Act, Australia mandated the compulsory retention of telecommunications metadata. And that included not only what you would regard as metadata about people's phone locations and calls, but also the retention of identity documentation associated with getting the phone in the first place, right? So you can't get a SIM card in Australia without handing over 100 points of ID, and the telecommunications providers not only had to ask for it, they had to retain it. And as you probably know, there was a massive data breach by Optus in which a great deal of that information was left on an unauthenticated API on the internet. At least that was the story. So one could say that the legislation merely required them to retain it. It did not require them to be gobsmackingly irresponsible in posting it online. But there is nevertheless a direct causal connection between forcing them to retain that information and it winding up insecurely on the internet. So I think we have some indication both ways, both that sometimes these laws do help in catching criminals and also sometimes these laws do bad things for the security of everybody who's not a criminal. And then in answer to your next question, which is sort of what's happening now and what about the more nuanced approach to breaking security on the internet, what has happened in some ways, the last thing that the coalition government managed to do for internet security was shift all of this regulation away from the oversight of the Parliament into the office of the e-Safety Commissioner. So none of these things now get debated explicitly in Parliament anymore. They're not laws anymore. They're just regulations that the e-Safety Commissioner makes up. And she has gone on the record very recently with this sort of, in fact, I will read a little quote from her. She is in the midst of regulating end-to-end encrypted messaging apps at the moment. And she has rejected a proposal from industry. And her reason for rejection is as follows, and I quote, "There are privacy-preserving tools capable of detecting known child sexual abuse material and known pro-terror material that are widely available and also frequently used. These tools often rely on hash matching and operate without reviewing the specific content of messages." So anybody who can tell me how to compute a hash without reviewing the specific content of messages can make that work on the internet. I think we've kind of passed the point where any kind of reason or logic or computer science knowledge gets applied.
Thank you, Vanessa. And you make a very good point there. So a lot of these laws, they don't go into the technical details of implementation. So they just say, this is what we want you to achieve. We want you to help us catch the bad guys. How you will do that? Mystery. So now let's turn to Pablo. Pablo, you are a well-known technical expert. And you're kind of, prominent in APrIGF as well. But you are also a parent. So could you tell us now, as a parent, how important has online safety been for your children and your observation of how important it has been for children in general?
Thank you. Quite fascinating. It's not necessarily my area of comfort. And we were trying hard the other day when we met online. And it's very strange because Alex caught a virus. And then we met online with Shruti that caught a virus. And they couldn't be here with us today, unfortunately. So I really hope that you are feeling better. And I'm now more afraid about my online safety if this virus went from Australia to India one way or another. It's out of my area of comfort because when Noelle and Shruti talked about intermediary liabilities and regulation around that, and then I was trying to make a case about how encryption at the very lower levels of the internet worked in terms of RPKI or DNSSEC or these other things, I thought that that was not a good approach. So there is something that I have been saying for quite a while, and it is that internet governance starts at home. And sometimes we see these internet discussions, and when I was just listening to Noelle giving this her introductory remarks, we can see them as very esoteric and abstract until we're faced with the challenge of making decisions at home. How you configure your router, how to manage your Wi-Fi password, and the devices that are connected to your home network, and whether it is possible or impossible to control your kids' exposure to harmful, hateful, unlawful content, to filter or not to filter, what filters, what parental filter products or firewalls to apply in your home network, how to prevent children from being scammed or recruited or taken advantage of. And these are questions that I face sort of every day. And sometimes I see friends that talk all the time about open, free, multi-stakeholder, let's discuss together and have a consensus building approach. And then they have a fully controlled environment at home with all these filters and controlled apps and access to browsing history of the kids, and kids not being able to take part of those discussions. And when you see these questions at home, I think it makes us more genuine and realistic in terms of what we're bringing to this forum. So it's very interesting as well, the question from Debayan when he was telling that mathematics are unbeatable, but regulatory regimes most of the times are unnecessary, and that goes along with what Noelle was saying. because they have not proven or demonstrated that they are solving sort of specific questions. So I want to talk about a recent paper. It was published just this week. The author is Danielle Keats-Citron, a law professor from the United States, and she published this paper that I recommend fully. And when I read it, I said, like, this is it. This is what I will bring to this session. It's called Under the Eye, the Surveilled Student, and it explores the topic of surveillance and the costs and benefits associated with it. Fact is that many schools, including my children's school here in Brisbane, there is continuous monitoring of students' online activities. And this is not by law or by regulation, as Vanessa was saying. This is mere product procurement by schools, right? And there are so many products that are being implemented to really check on every type of behavior that students have, and they usually use laptops provided by school as well. So 10 years ago, with the Snowden revelations, we went through a process of clear rejection to government's bulk collection of adults' metadata, and Vanessa mentioned that doesn't necessarily is followed worldwide. But the whole question of mass surveillance at the time, the arguments in favor of traceability and against encryption had to do with catching terrorists. And then we have been saying how many terrorists we have been able to catch and whether the regulations were in measure or in proportion to the achievements. And these days the narrative has changed a bit, and it is more about protecting children. Nobody seems to be against this. So this is a very effective narrative in favor of a lot of security initiatives. But I think a lot about the situation of young students. And if you can see sort of how they see these things in the world, this is a generation that has grown with excessive surveillance in their devices and by their parents and in their school. So Professor Keats-Citron argues that we live in a golden era of student surveillance, and this is not good, and we should question their effectiveness in preventing violence, bullying, or self-harm, and whether these products are actually doing that. So she mentions that these products have mostly led towards disproportionate discipline in terms of actions for minor infractions, like accessing a website. Monitoring systems can just out LGBTQ+ students to teachers and parents who may be unsupportive of that. Of course, this comes with diminished privacy, and student surveillance infringes on student intimate privacy, which is crucial for their self-development and self-expression as well. It limits personal growth, it has negative impact on relationships, and this is the way that we are bringing students to life. So I think this goes very much along the questions of online safety that we're talking about, and it seems that we need to bring in the internet governance context safeguards to protect sort of these things. And this is way before regulatory or laws are being discussed or implemented. And we really need to prove sort of these surveillance tools. We need to protect student privacy as well, also of our own kids at home. We need to shift the burden of proof to companies, whether their products really adapt to the policies that we want, rather than a blanket sort of filtering out or monitoring systems. And most importantly, I think we need to bring this discussion of transparency and oversight and be part of those discussions of what products and to what degree those products monitor students and to what degree we as parents are monitoring students. And this all requires stakeholder input, including and most importantly of the kids. So that's the thing or reflections that I wanted to bring to this conversation.
Thank you, Pablo. A lot of excellent points there, and I think we're heading to a very interesting aspect of the discussion, which is user empowerment. And our next speaker, Alex, would have something to say to this. But before I go back to Shruti, if you have any questions at this point, please note them down because you are next. Okay, we will have time for Q&A and participation from participants in the room as well as in our Zoom room. So with that, back to you, Shruti.
Thank you. So coming back for online to Alex. Alex, we've heard the technical experts here talk about the problems that exist with forcing service providers to enable traceability or solutions like client-side scanning. I just wanted to understand from you that given that technical experts are saying that solutions like backdoors, traceability, and client-side scanning doesn't work, do you think empowering users with the tools where they themselves can understand where they want to block a content or where they themselves can understand what they want to filter, what they want to see, is a more feasible solution than putting this mandate on the service provider? And also would like to understand from you, like what are the tools or what are the system level designs that Google has created for empowering users in this respect, where they themselves can be in control of their safety? And how are the users using it? Do you guys also engage in some kind of awareness drives towards ensuring that users are able to understand these technologies and techniques better and use them for their safety and security purposes?
Thank you, Shruti. Yes, it's our view that the best threat detection network for harmful content you can have is one that scales and one that is sensitive to people's emerging concerns. We know that content on the internet changes over time and online harms will differ through time as well, depending on what people's perceptions of the most pressing concerns are. That's something that citizens and civil society are best positioned to enable through a robust reporting framework, and that can be supported by technology like machine learning, detection systems, and hashing systems. Indeed, as others have pointed out, only can work on public and unencrypted data. And government collaboration is an important aspect of this as well. Fundamentally, we want people to be safe and to have control over their own experiences online. We want them to empower them with the tools to protect themselves and curate their own digital experience. And we think that awareness, the education that you talked about, is critically important. Making sure people understand these tools, how to use them, where they can find them, is something that we do pay a lot of attention to and have drives on, both through our products and in collaboration with governments and civil society and others quite regularly. Tools to report harassment and inappropriate content can be backed by transparency. We do think that's important, and why it's concerning that a number of these new regulations do have anti-transparency provisions in them. I think it's good if government regulators and civil society groups can get an insight into what is being reported and what is being addressed by us as platforms, as well as the requests that we're getting from government for purposes like law enforcement, which are an important part of this debate. In terms of encryption, it is definitely our position that encryption both in transit and at rest is vital to the protection of citizens, businesses, and other institutions across society. It protects our families and children. And if you think about a very simple thing, such as the messages we send to schedule pickups and drop-offs for our kids, or thousands and thousands of photos we take of our kids every year, can be protected from the people who might have ill intent towards our families. Platform safety is one of the reasons that we have been successful over time as a company. The decades of effort we've put into making our systems and platforms secure and safe, and the ongoing efforts towards that. To give you a basket of ideas, and this is, I could talk, as others have said, you could spend a day talking about these things, but things like safe browsing, protecting 4 billion devices, and probably including the ones that people in this room use, Gmail blocking over 100 million phishing attempts every day, Google Play scans about 100 billion apps every day to protect people from things like malware. But we do know that children are growing up with technology in ways that previous generations haven't. So we're working directly with experts and educators to help set boundaries, think about the boundaries we want in our technology, and help to build them into our products. Things like Family Link, which allows people to manage their child's devices so that you can set safety controls when they're exploring online, screen time limits, and things like that. And special features like smart filters, site blockers, content ratings, in collaboration with governments and into many of our products across the Play, Assistant, YouTube, and more, to make them more family friendly. Now, this is something that we've developed over a long period of time to help organizations protect children. And we do deal with some of the more pointy ends of the content moderation spectrum, including child sexual abuse material, terrorism material, and things like that. So we provide a toolkit for external partners through an API, Content Safety API, and CSAI Match. And those are free for partners as part of our contribution to the ecosystem. And they use technologies to process billions of files every year, evaluating millions of images and videos for abusive behavior, uses programmatic access and artificial intelligence to help both classify the images and prioritize them for review. And the higher priority these automated systems give them, the more likely they are the images to contain abusive material, and it helps people whose job it is to review this material, both at the civil society side and in government, to prioritize their human review processes, which can be, I think, psychologically challenging in a lot of these fields where you're dealing with very, very harmful content. And this prioritization is important both to minimize people's having to work through screeds and screeds of this, but also to prioritize the most extreme content for initial review. But we still do think it's important to have a human in the loop because the automated systems we have at the moment are not perfect. This is something that we put a lot of effort into as a company. And we do think that we have a strong role to play here. However, I do want to reiterate that encryption is vital for the protection of our societies, both at the individual level and at the organizational level for businesses and institutions as well.
Thank you, Alex. Very important points around definitely encryption is vital, be it at transit or at rest, and empowerment of users and more collaboration and coordination between private companies and the government towards envisaging important and better innovative techniques and solutions for safety is very important. And it's great to know that Google is undertaking these efforts, and we hope that these efforts help in creating a more safer space in times to come. Noelle, just coming back to you, I think we should now open it up for audience engagement.
We should indeed. So, are you ready with your questions? Well, before we go to that, I'm curious. How many, in a show of hands, in this room are using, and the Zoom room as well, are using WhatsApp or Signal or any other applications or services that we are using because we know they are secure or we believe they are secure? Quite a lot of people. That explains why you're in this session. I shouldn't have asked you to take that hand down because I was going to ask now, how many, if you knew that there are third parties, if you knew that government can read what you're saying, how likely are you to continue using these services? A few. You have nothing to hide. That's true. So, Pablo, would you mind elaborating on that?
Well, first I was going to ask Alex when Google Messages are going to be end-to-end encrypted, because currently they are not. All those Android users using text SMS, that's the Google messaging, and I really hope that you can stand up to the trend. That would be awesome. And secondly, I mean, again, this was a very easy experiment just in the room. And if you see those that said like, yeah, I don't mind, government surveillance, that's okay. They were all probably sort of 1997, 2003 generation. And that's because you most likely have lived most of your school years in this type of regime,
Very good point, Pablo. So now we turn to you, our participants, to see if you have any comments or questions about the session. If there are any representatives here or anyone who works for government or law enforcement, we would very much like to hear from you as well. We are conscious that we don't have a government or law enforcement representative in the panel, and it's very important to hear your perspective as well, because I'm sure it would enrich our discussion. Do we have any hands for questions? Oh, yes. Hi, everyone. So I'm just gonna reiterate what you said, that internet governance starts at home, but I also believe that privacy also includes your home. So personally, where do you think should parents and guardians alike should draw the line between content moderation for children? Because I personally cannot define it by myself, and I don't know how, because we want children to develop on their own, grow personally, express themselves, but we also don't want them to access harmful content. But in doing so, similarly, the problem with the global nation that we are actually violating some of their human rights, and children have rights too. So where do we draw the line at home? Thank you.
I'd be happy to have a go at that, but I'd also be happy to hand it back to Pablo, who's obviously thought about it a lot. Pablo, do you have anything more to say?
Go ahead, Vanessa, and then we can hear from Pablo.
I am also a parent. I have 3 children, one of whom is an adult now, and I minimized surveillance of my kids. First of all, I think the analogy between the surveillance of children and the surveillance of adults is a bit wrong, because of course it is appropriate for very small children to have their environments controlled by somebody else, right? You don't let them run on the road, and similarly, you don't let them cruise the internet freely on their own. I think that the role of platforms in pushing emotive material at everybody is a big part of the picture that deserves to be discussed when we're talking about children browsing online. I think if there was better regulation of unsolicited serving of stuff at people, then kids wouldn't be in as much danger browsing YouTube as they are, right? That's a decision by YouTube or by Facebook or by whatever to be pulling eyeballs by serving increasingly emotive content at people. Maybe the internet would be a safer place if advertising eyeballs were not the primary design goal around which it was organised. So I think it's hard, like any other part of parenting. I agree very strongly that the rights of children, particularly the rights of older children to have privacy from their parents, as well as from third parties on the internet, are critically important. And I have never run any of that creepy spyware on my kids, and I never will. Maybe I'm watching what they're doing some of the time, but I'm never showing their stuff to third parties. And I have refused all consent for the school to do so to the extent that I could.
All right, thanks, Vanessa. Pablo.
Oh, this is good, because I like good debate, and thank you, Vanessa, for pushing back. And I think it goes along with where is the line and who draws the line, and whether you need to expect sort of school to draw the line for you, and then we're saying that probably not, or whether the government to draw the line for you, and probably not. And then there is this question about bottom up or top down, right? And to what degree sort of you can do whatever you want at home, and then they face a different reality in their community, and how do you reconcile that? I do think that we need to I mean, I want to push back on Vanessa in terms of they need a little surveillance, but not a lot. And then where you draw the line, or you need to control that, especially for small kids, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, it is very, very likely that these kids will sort of find content that they are not supposed to find. And it is more likely that they will do it regardless of whatever sort of product you impose to them at home. So I think the conversation has more to do on how you have that conversation with your kids, assuming that they will be connected one way or another. They will see things that they shouldn't be seeing because it's everywhere, right? So that's exactly why I think you need to have those conversations as early as possible at home, and for them to create that discernment, because all of this at the end is about discernment, right? It's not about safety, it's about discernment. And that is something that I would like to sort of stress very much, because you can say, yes, top down, sort of surveilled, monitored to some degree, but where will they get the discernment? And it is most likely that they will need to get that from home, starting at home.
Thank you, Pablo. We have a question on, sorry. We have a question online. And Shruti, I hope you don't mind, Jen has very kindly offered to read it out.
Yes, please.
So this is a question from an online participant, Fred Goddard. The question is, Apple made an attempt to monitor CSAM, but it got a lot of backlash, and they pulled that attempt. Can anyone explain what they tried to do, why there was such a backlash, and is there a system like that would work?
Do we have any volunteers?
I read the paper. I can have a go, unless.
Okay. Thank you, Vanessa, because I can only.
I read the crypto protocol, and it's another use of the perceptual hashing algorithms. So the idea was that there would be some kind of authority that supplied a list of hashes of targeted material of whatever kind. And then there was a very clever, very nifty cryptographic protocol with the property that the device would hash the images that the person was about to send. And then there was a very clever multi-party computation protocol for assessing whether the hashes of the pictures that the person was about to send matched a threshold number of the hashes that were in the database of targeted photographs. And if the matches exceeded a certain threshold, then that would be brought to the attention of Apple, and then they would review the pictures. And then if the pictures were indeed targeted images of whatever kind, then they would contact the relevant authorities. So as a cryptographic protocol, I don't think anyone disputes that it had the properties it was supposed to have, which were approximately that. Nothing about the contents of your phone would be communicated unless the threshold number of matches was met. My concern about that protocol is who chooses the hashes, right? Because it's marketed as catching pedophiles and terrorists, but exactly the same technology can be used just as easily to catch people who are sharing pictures of Tank Man, or people who have leaked embarrassing pictures of the US military shooting civilians, right? So the technology does a thing, but there's very little transparency about exactly what it's detecting. Go, Debayan.
Sure. And yeah, I agree with everything Vanessa said. Sort of, there's technology can do stuff, but then at the end of the day, all it's doing is providing leverage and power to a certain group. And as long as there isn't sufficient oversight there, you're just getting yourself into more trouble. I also want to say that I have an inherent, call it a bias, all right? Anytime anybody comes and sells me something that tells me it's going to help my liver, reduce my ache in my foot, and help me think faster or something else, I think they're selling me snake oil. So when someone comes to me and says, hey, here's a solution, it's going to reduce terrorism, prevent pedophiles, and solve drug crime. And I'm like, okay, seems suspicious. And when I look deeper and I find that the main thing they're doing is giving a small group of people more power, I get even more suspicious, right? The problem with a lot of these protocols, again, they're coming from a good place very often, but almost all of the time, what they end up doing is moving the decision somewhere else, right? About what is good and what is bad. And I think that decision needs to be devolved as far as possible. I'll also just mention a couple of different things about the prior questions that were asked in just a minute. One is another problem with the children scenario is that very often the teenager is the most technically adept person in the home. So, using technology to prevent your child, your 14-year-old from seeing porn or whatever, like, good luck with that. There is also a difference between what is legal and what is prudent. And I think a huge problem with us is that, how do you deal with a generation who's not angry that the NSA looked at their private posts? They're angry that the NSA didn't hit like. How do you deal with that sort of oversharing mindset? And again, I want to really emphasize that the government that we're afraid of is not a particular government. What we're afraid of is not sort of a SHIELD style, if you're an Avengers fan, a SHIELD style sort of super competent group of people who are sort of surveilling everyone. No, these are not the brightest crayons in the box. Like, why do we think that our intelligence officials and the police are any cleverer than the most incompetent department that you've seen in the government? In the US, that would be the Department of Motor Vehicles, for example. Right? These are, if you, someone was talking about the terrorists that work on, and I was just looking up, in 2015, there was a great ProPublica article written about this, because they looked at what had happened under the Bush administration after the 2001 attacks and the increased surveillance thereafter, and there was a Senate Intelligence Committee, this, that, and the other. And the NSA has publicly, speaking after the Stellar Wind protocol and so on, they've spoken about exactly 4 cases, 4 after spending tens of billions of dollars of public money, if not more. They've spoken publicly of only 4 cases where the surveillance was actively used. And out of those, there was only 1 case where this mass surveillance that they were doing actually helped them make an arrest. That was the case of a taxi driver who sent $8,500 to his brother in Somalia. That's the best example of cost-benefit analysis we have till today. So as a public sort of taxpayer, my question is even deeper. I'm like, look, you're asking me to spend all this money, come up with new protocols, hop on one leg, dance under the full moon, whatever. Let's say we come up with this. What is the benefit that I'm getting? And the answers that I get are woefully vague. That's my problem.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Debayan. We can take one more. We were given a very small time extension, so we can take one more question in the room, and then another in online. I think the gentleman who was first? Oh, I'm so the gentleman nearer to me was first. I'm very sorry. And then we have another online question, I believe.
Yes, I think Amrita wants
one more comment. Can we do this very quickly? We take all that, and then speakers can have 1 minute each to answer and wrap up, and then we'll turn it over to Shruti.
Yeah, just very quickly, I just wanted to actually go back to the point that Vanessa made about accountability of the platforms, the responsibility of the platforms who are targeting content. It's very clear. I'm a parent too. When my kids watch YouTube, they are targeted with specific content, which is very hard for them to push back or turn off because it's been designed to engage them and grab their attention. I'd love to hear responses from the panel about this issue of holding platforms more accountable to what they serve us, the users.
Should I ask the question now?
Yes,
Noelle?
we can hear you. We can hear you, Amrita. Please go ahead.
Thank you. An interesting discussion. One question was, in the room, we are talking about parents who are educated and understand, how they need to protect their children online. However, we should not forget that there are many parents in our region who are not even internet literate or tech savvy. How do you expect them to guide their children? That's one comment. And that's a question. And my comment was, yes, we are wary of governments trying to surveil us, or tech trying to surveil, big tech trying to surveil us. However, there is an issue in the table, which is that there is a growing CSAM, there is growing terrorist content, etc. So things have to be done. If, what they say in terms of breaking encryption is an issue, which even I have an issue about, what are the alternatives we are giving them so that this narrative closes? So I think that the discussion needs to move there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amrita. So we have 1 minute for the speakers. Well, 1 minute each, maybe, for just wrap up. Okay. So whoever the speakers who want to comment on that, please do on the 2 questions, and then I'll turn to Shruti to wrap the discussion up.
Well, I'd like to hear from Alex, right? When is Google messaging going to be end-to-end encrypted, and when is YouTube going to have a kid button that stops pushing other stuff that the kid didn't ask for?
YouTube, I now bear in mind that I'm not the YouTube person, I work on Google Core, but YouTube does include a kids function, and the policies there, as I understand it, have been developed in collaboration with external specialists in child development, children's media, digital learning. For example,
this is a different thing, right? It's one thing to have surveillance and restriction. It's a different thing to just have a button that says, I'm going to search for a particular thing. Don't push at me anything else I didn't ask for.
So you do have YouTube Kids that you can switch across to, which doesn't surveil people. The content there is moderated such that it is appropriate for children.
But
and
it
the
keeps
policies
pushing
there.
stuff that the kid didn't ask
for. There are things that you can say report content that you don't think is appropriate, right? Like it does have those content reporting things. We do have automated filters built by our engineering. We've got a human review, and we do rely on feedback from parents to say, is your child being served something that you think is inappropriate? Please do provide feedback on that. And it's not going to be perfect given that it's a user-generated content platform, but it's useful to get that, particularly in the modern era where we have things like reinforcement learning for our AI systems, which will help adapt those over time as we get the feedback from parents. So that's something that we do think about when it comes to YouTube. I'm sure my YouTube colleague could provide more deeper comments on that, but that is something that I know that they take very seriously.
Is there a serious proposal to have a button that says, don't push at me anything I didn't ask for?
I haven't seen any kind of button, Professor, as far as I know, but then again, I don't. My kids aren't at the age where they use YouTube Kids yet, so I'm not sure.
Well, I found this panel quite interesting, but it was just the start of a lot of things that need to be unpacked. It's clear for me that there are technological answers, then there are products, then there are policies and regulations, and then there are parents that we struggle every day to find that, and neither the technological solutions, nor the products, nor the regulations are enough for our children to be safe. So we need to put our effort into promoting more discernment, and that is technologically neutral and doesn't require a lot of digital skills.
Thanks very much. Just to quickly answer, there is some of you might have read there's a proposed framework on coming from New Zealand on online safety, and that has a provision that would require platforms to be accountable for promotion algorithms, which is, I think, something that so it's something to look into. With that, let me turn over to Shruti to wrap up the discussion.
Thank you so much. And the discussion was quite enriching. It's sad that we have to now wrap up because we are 5 minutes, in fact, above the time limit. So thank you so much for all the insightful comments and the insightful discussion that we had today here this morning and this afternoon in Australia. Thank you to all the speakers for sharing their insightful thoughts on this issue. I'd very quickly like to, in just 1 minute, sum up the key points that have come out of this discussion. So as the discussion revolved around encryption and how there has been a lot of considerations by law enforcement and governments towards maybe diluting the encryption security in the quest of enhancing online safety. The recommendations from our experts here is that it's not a good solution towards safety and security, because encryption itself, be it encryption at rest or encryption in transit, is a non-negotiable technique or a technological advancement which has been crucial towards ensuring safety, security, and privacy of users online. So any proposal towards diluting this security, this protocol is going to undermine the secure internet infrastructure. Child safety has been an important issue, and that has been one of the critical reasons for law enforcement agencies to come up with anti-encryption legislations. However, our experts believe that child safety, even for child safety, encryption is a crucial tool. And by breaking encryption, we are not going to make children more safer. There are tools, there are techniques that's being developed by companies like Google, Meta, and they are invested towards having better design solutions to ensure that users are empowered with the right tools and techniques, where they themselves can be in control of what they want to see, what they watch. So focusing on devising these tools and techniques is a better approach. We need to build user awareness towards using these tools and techniques rather than coming up with solutions that compromise the security infrastructure of the internet. It's important that the stakeholders, the law enforcement agencies, the government works with the platforms better. They come up with solutions that are more secure and that do not lead to counterproductive results. In fact, statistics also show, and there is no data to support, as one of our experts said, that encryption, breaking encryption is of any help. So it's important that we think of better solutions which are more feasible and which are in sync with the digital rights of the users across the world. So thank you so much for this conversation. And I think we can wrap up, but thanks from the Dialogue and the Internet Society for joining us today and for sharing your thoughts. We are indebted for this, and we'll also be sharing a recommendation document from this session, a 2-page summary, which will highlight what has been shared here, and we hope to use that to build greater discourse on this issue.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. I know we ate into some of your tea time, so please enjoy your tea time. And thank you to the speakers.
Thank you all.
Up next in the plenary hall, after you take your tea and your coffee, it will begin at 3:30 local time. It is the town hall session. Please do come. All the good